following is a GNC podcast production. Welcome to Geek Addicts, a pop culture podcast.
Hello and welcome to Geek Addicts, the pop culture podcast where we talk about summoning devils to learn the secret of immortality. My name is Matt. With me, he's got a gun in his heart, Bill Barber. How's it going, Bill?
I'm so lost now to think of that one for a minute. I'm doing okay. It's been a rough week, but at the time this comes out, it'll be like a month after that. But we'll see how we are by then.
Yeah, hopefully things will be improved.
Yeah.
I don't know about your week, but it just feels like everything in my house is falling apart all at once.
I know that feeling.
Like the spray hose in our sink is broken, our oven is broken, our dryer is broken, our fridge is leaking. It is like literally everything is fucking falling apart all at once.
That's kind of been my experience being a first time homeowner. The place was a shithole when I bought it, and I had to fix everything because of the previous tenants. But I'm still finding stuff. Like things I notice things. I'm like, oh, that's great.
No kidding. But yeah, I mean, we both made some progress on animes this week, so that's a good thing at least.
Yeah, we're kicking it into gear now because we're getting closer to the end of the year. We got 2.5 months before the year end recap. So
I don't know about everybody else, but I'm banging out a good portion of the list I'll be bringing to the year end wrap up within the next couple of months for sure.
Well, I want to at least challenge Slade and possibly Alex this year because
I'm not setting my sights that high.
I mean, I know Slade's watched a lot, but I can at least like follow him because me and him both are on AniList, and AniList you can actually see what other people are watching, which is kind of fun.
That's fair.
Alex is not, so like I have no idea what Alex has watched. All I know is she's watched like over 70 shows. So
seriously?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Although she counts her rewatches, so we'll have to see what that means.
I do too, but to be fair, the vast majority of rewatches I've had this year are things that I haven't seen in the better part of a decade. In some cases more than a decade. So, true. I mean, those ones you get a little bit of leeway with, you know.
I'm probably gonna. So I keep mine separate, just because I like to count just stuff I've seen the first time. But I am gonna this year have a separate side. I'm gonna note the things I did rewatch, so I'll at least have a note of them, but they're not gonna be on my official list.
I was planning on doing pretty much the same thing. Yeah, I have like separate categories for new watches, rewatches, and movies. Like separate them all. Right now, they're just all on the same list, just until I sort them out.
Yeah, like people don't need to know I rewatched Inuyasha for like again because it's expected that I'm going to at least watch part of that during the year.
Yeah, and although I haven't put it on my list, but I did technically rewatch most of both Kaguya-sama and Fruits Basket this year, just because Cindy was watching them. So, just from happening to be there, I watched a lot of those again. So, not the whole thing for both, but most of them.
Speaking of Kaguya-sama, you recently finished Oshinoko.
Yeah, yesterday I finished it up. I was really enjoying the story. Really looking forward to season 2, which as of recording, I believe is wrapping up in Japan, and the dub is just starting to come out here.
Episode 3, I believe, just released dub. So
yeah, so I got a little bit because at least until the dub is complete for season 2, it's definitely not going to be leaving High Dive, which I don't have at the moment. The only reason I watched Oshinoko is because the first season was put on Hulu. So hopefully when the dub is complete, that'll get put on Hulu. It'll probably be a little bit, but I might just do a free trial just to watch the second season because I'm kind of invested in the story now. I might even buy the manga.
I don't want to say too much because I've read ahead in the manga and Oh boy, the series takes some weird turns, but
I can
it
already
is.
kind of see some shades of stuff coming up.
Yeah, there's a particular aspect to it that I'm not 100% sure how I feel about, but I'll leave that
Understandable.
for people
Well,
who are interested to find out.
as I said to you, behind the curtain, that I'm already seeing like some stuff going on in the background that's making me kind of like,
The premise
don't know
is
how this is going to
weird
unfold, but
as
it's
yeah.
yeah.
The premise is one of those things that's really interesting, but then when you really think about some of the aspects of the plot, you're like, what the fuck? Like,
Well,
what am
especially
I?
once you start getting more details about like their feelings about certain things, and it's just I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes.
See, for me, my biggest like thing that always gets me is this technically the same universe as Kaguya-sama.
Hmm.
Like they
Which is bizarre.
which is apparently like leads me to believe that like this is all happening like at the same time as like the goofy Kaguya-sama stuff is happening. So
Well, from what you told me about that little like crossover reference, apparently like the Kaguya stuff happened like years before what's going on in Oshinoko now.
yeah, yeah, because
So I don't know
Kaguya
how
is
many years, but Kaguya is apparently married, so at least a portion, at least a few years.
yeah, oh yeah, the big like thing that the blink it or miss it thing is if you pay attention to her signature at the end there, she's it's revealed that she married Mayuki at one point,
Hmm.
which I mean everyone saw coming, but
Yeah, I mean it's kind of obvious. It's kind of the point of the whole show.
I know in the Kaguya-sama manga, one of the later chapters, there's an image of there's like a big poster for Bikamachi in the background. So
Mhm.
it's there is definitely some crossover. He
I
has a
got you.
third he's got a third series like manga that he's writing as well. That's not as like shit insane as Oshinoko, but it hasn't been brought over here yet. But apparently that also takes place in the same universe.
But I imagine the shared universe thing with Oshinoko and Kaguya and whatever that third series is probably somewhat similar to how technically Doctor Slump and Dragon Ball take place in the same universe,
Hmm,
which
true.
is so out of the realm of possibility, but it just is. So you just kind of have
Yeah.
to accept that.
It's just one of those weird things that that you just kind of accept the more you get through it.
Yeah.
Oh,
But yeah, aside from that, I got my Crunchyroll back. So I've
nice.
also been chipping away at One Piece. I am at the time of recording right now, I less than 40 episodes before I am caught up on the dub. So
Hmm.
whew, almost there, almost there.
Yeah.
But
At
I
the
also was that
I was gonna say just I've been like switching between like Netflix, Crunchyroll, High Dive because there's a I'm not gonna lie, High Dive is worth the subscription because like there is a lot of stuff on High Dive right now.
yeah, I've been thinking about that lately because like, not even just Oshinoko, but I've been hearing about a bunch of stuff that's on there that just isn't anywhere else. It feels like a lot of streaming services are trying to like snatch up ones that are just say, no, you can only watch this here.
Well,
Like how
High
Netflix is
Dive,
like, if you want to watch JoJo Part 6, you have to go to Netflix. You
yeah.
can't watch it anywhere else.
I'll give High Dive credit. Like they get exclusive rights to most of their stuff like right away, and then eventually they'll let it branch out. High Dive, though, I'll say is it. I'll give it a pass on a lot of things, mostly because it's pretty much all just Sentai stuff. Because Sentai owns High Dive,
Mhm.
so it's not like they're hoarding specific things. It's just they're basically just releasing the stuff that they own,
I gotcha.
which is fine because you also get a lot of old ADV stuff, including like Azumanga Daioh's on there, which is amazing.
Oh, that's cool. That's one that I've been meaning to watch because it's one that I've a lot of like old school anime fans talk about that one, and it's just I've been wanting to check out more like 80s and 90s like older anime.
So
So,
Azumanga Daioh is like a 2000s anime, like very early. Um, it, the reason why Azumanga Daioh is so amusing is it was one of those animes that was considered undubbable for the longest
mhm.
time because it is the series is I always joke saying like the series is literally Seinfeld the anime because it's literally an
Mhm.
anime about nothing.
Yeah.
it's just five high school girls and the weird shit that happens.
Well, that's like the same kind of shit that people say about Doctor Slump that it's undubbable, but no, it's definitely dubbable. There's plenty of other gag animes that have come out over here dubbed and they make total sense, even if they had to change up some of the jokes to make them work. Like you can make it work. You
I
just
know
have to try. And at this point, we have enough people who know what they're doing in the industry that they could do it and it wouldn't be a big deal.
they could definitely do it nowadays. Like obviously like early 2000s, I understand like that could have been a bit more of a thing.
Yeah, a
Um
little bit more of a struggle, especially with like the weird way that they treated American audiences with anime. Like they a lot of censorship, a lot of localization, stuff like that.
also like slice of life and like comedy animes just didn't really come out over here at the time.
True. It was all actiony stuff.
It was basically all Dragon Ball shonens and stuff. Like
Yeah, like that style.
even like the more girly animes were like Sailor Moon and stuff, which were still pretty action packed.
Mm-hmm.
But
Uh,
I
but
know
yeah,
in the
I was gonna continue with the anime thing. Go on.
I was just gonna say like I know in over on the GNC server we have the gift space, which is just I swear every server has like that one channel that's just dedicated to like gifs or like emojis or something.
Yeah, gifs and
And
memes.
our on the GNC server we have the anime gift space, which is just random no context anime gifs at all times. But
Mhm.
I always love to throw like Ozumagadaya ones in there because like they are just hilarious because they're out of context. It's like what the fuck is this show?
I can imagine.
Like my favorite
Yeah,
one I posted.
it's definitely one I want to check out.
Yeah, my favorite one I posted recently was them in like the swimming pool during like school like swimming class, and like one of the girls is like just like floats to the top of the surface, and it just like the reactions from the characters are great.
Hmm.
In context, it makes sense, but as a GIF, you're like, what the fuck?
I can imagine. Yeah, aside from that, I rewatched Fooly Cooly for the first time in a very long time.
Hmm.
And god damn, that's just as confusing as it always was. It's entertaining for sure, but it's just so fucking chaotic and insane. It makes absolutely no sense.
Hmm.
The soundtrack is a fucking bop though. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, yeah, that's my favorite part about watching like different animes recently, like the fucking soundtracks. Like every show's got a
Yeah.
different one, and it's like, wow, these things bop.
I've also been rewatching Darker Than Black. Have you ever seen that one?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I
No.
haven't had the chance to watch it.
It's an interesting one. It's another one of those like original animes where there's no. I mean, technically they made like a 2-volume manga after the fact, but it was like Cowboy Bebop, where it's or Death Parade, where it was made specifically to be an anime.
Hmm.
Um, and it's really hard to find nowadays. Like, you can't stream it anywhere, even though like if you Google it, it says you can watch it on YouTube, but they only have one episode, which is pretty useless because the entire series is just like 2-part episodes.
Ah,
So getting one episode doesn't really do much for you. Um, but it's like really hard to find nowadays. And even if you want to get the DVDs, like I looked on eBay just for shits and giggles, just to see, it's like fucking $200 for that show, and it's only a 26 episode show. It's not a long one, and there is technically a second season, but it's garbage.
yeah.
It
Huh.
completely changes the whole tone of the show.
I mean,
Um,
that's not as tone. Well, I mean, when I think like confused, like tonally confused shows, I still think Full Metal Panic is like the winner of like just this show has no idea what it wants to be.
you said you watched that show this week, right?
I well, I watched it in full like way back, like back in like the day, but it's been like years since I've actually given it a full rewatch.
Mhm.
So I just kind of counted this as my as a watch, like because it legit the last time I watched it in full was like early 2000s. So,
I gotcha.
but yeah, Full Metal Panic is one of those shows where it's one of the few mech shows that I can actually watch.
Mhm.
Um, but what makes it so fucking hilarious is the show is literally split between mech action and goofy high school slice of life, and it can't decide which one it wants to be. It's the most tonally confused show like ever. But then it gets better because the second season just fucking throws the mech stuff out, and it's just a fucking slice of life the entire time.
That's pretty funny.
But then the third season gets rid of all the slice of life comedy and just becomes a full on action mech show. Like
That's wild.
it's bizarre. Like it's even more like heavy than the first season.
That's crazy. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I might have to check that out. I never really got into mech animes personally, like Transformers and Gundam and
I mean,
Neon Genesis. Like I never watched any of that stuff.
Evangelion's the only other one that I kind of understand why, because that show is just fucking deep on a lot of levels. I could never get into Gundam though. Could never get into like Macross or any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
they all just kind of blend together.
Yeah, that's the main reason why I was always kind of like lukewarm on it. But with part of me trying to like go out and spread out and try different genres of anime, for that reason, I might have to watch a couple of them. I'll look up like some of the better ones are. I heard good things about. I don't remember what franchise is part of, but there's a series called Iron Blooded Orphans. I think it's an offshoot of. Might be an offshoot of Gundam. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. But I heard that was good.
Another good one that's worth watching is Gurren Lagann, but Gurren Lagann's kind of like a parody of mech anime. It's the same people that did Kill la Kill.
Okay.
Where Kill la Kill was more of a parody of shonen. Gurren Lagann's like a parody of mech anime, which is kind of why I find it more interesting.
I gotcha. But yeah, it's pretty much been it for stuff that I've watched this week. Haven't really played a whole lot. I did start a play of Dragon Quest VI, which
nice.
I just figured it was time. It's been a while since I beat the 5th one, and I've kind of like gone around. I've played 1 or 2 Final Fantasies and Chrono Trigger and a couple other games since then. So I was like, yeah, I think it's time to jump back into Dragon Quest. I haven't played very much. I've been only like 2 hours in or something like that, but
6 is good. It's just like the thing with 6. It's actually good that you're playing it now and not directly after 5, because 4 and 5 are like masterpieces, and 6 is a good game, but it definitely felt kind of like a step back compared to 4 and 5.
That's fair.
But playing it now, you won't even notice, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know, a lot of those kinds of, like with the Dragon Quest games and like the early Final Fantasies, they all kind of blend together for me. Like they don't have like, well, I guess it depends on which one individually, but in general, they don't have like super stellar writing or, incredible effects or anything like that. It's pretty standard for the time. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, Dragon Quest 3, 4, and 5. I love all 3 of those games are amazing.
So many puns.
Oh yeah, all the time. But yeah, I don't know. I need to keep going with that because I started my Dragon Quest run a few years ago now, and I still have 6, 7, 8, 9. So 5 more games to go through for Dragon Quest, at least out of the main games.
So you started 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 because we can't play 10 because Squeenix hates us.
Well, I heard a rumor that we were supposed to be getting an offline version of 10 at some point, but we'll see.
We've been supposed to get that for so long though that I'm always like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not holding my breath. I mean, I still have plenty of other games to play before I get to that. Between Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy alone, not even counting like the Persona games and whatever else. So,
yeah. Yep, I hear you there. But yeah, we've waffled on enough. We should probably jump into our topic for this episode. This one was one that you've been spearheading for a while now. I finally watched Baccano, so we're gonna finally talk about Baccano.
Huzzah! I finally know somebody else who's watched Baccano.
Yeah,
because it's one of those shows that like it is a very well done show, and I've read a bunch of the books too, and those are really really good too. Um, but it just feels like it's such an unknown, and it's so hard to find because
That
like I was saying earlier with Darker Than Black, you can't stream it anywhere. So you either need to download it or you need to buy the DVDs, which the official release DVDs are pretty expensive nowadays. I got lucky paying $80 for mine at actually at an Anime Boston years ago.
nice.
Um,
See,
I
I
believe
only
they're like twice the price now for the official.
yeah. See, I watched mine graciously because Matt sent me a bootleg, which I am
Yes,
very appreciative for.
but I mean, from what I saw, it was is a very well done bootleg. Bootlegs have come a long way. That's for sure.
It so it worked, but I am I basically the way I see it is I'm only going to watch these when I want to watch the show because when I booted these things up I was like sometimes the DVD player was like didn't want to read it and other times it would boot right up and I was like yeah it's a little hesitant on these.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whenever I get around to coming down and visiting you, I'll bring my hard drive and you can have my digital version. So that way you'll just have it. You can just stick it on a flash drive or something.
Yeah. It was funny though. Like occasionally, like I got to disc 2, and it was like it wouldn't play for a few tries, and I was like, "Oh no, like this might be a bad sign." But eventually, it did. I think the DVD player was just being shit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I had to. I watched via bootleg, but I got the full experience because, like Matt said, this show is impossible to find. Like,
Mm,
period. Um, legally.
yeah.
Even I mean, even I didn't watch it legally, technically. Um,
Yeah.
You know what I found interesting? I was looking into it. Like this show came out at a point too where like shows like this just kind of anime was still kind of in that weird space where not everyone had really accepted it yet.
Mhm.
And I feel like especially a show like this that was very not typical probably got overlooked.
Yeah. I mean, I believe when the show came out in Japan, we were in middle school, so it was still that weird, like awkward time for anime for sure
I
over here.
also I also found out this show apparently bombed in Japan but was very successful over here.
It's just, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense because of the tone of the show, because
Yeah, like
it's a
apparently the
very
reason
Western show.
yeah,
It
like I was
takes place
reading
in New York in the 20s.
yeah, I was reading apparently the reason why it never got a second season is because it was so poorly received and rated so badly in Japan that they just didn't bother.
That's wild to me too, because he'd been writing the books for a long time, and from what I understand, the books did really well.
True, but to be fair, like after watching this, like the series is very Western.
Oh, for sure. But I don't know. I feel like Western style stuff generally tends to do well over there. But I
To a
guess it depends
degree,
on what it is.
I think this one might have just came out at a weird time too. It's funny
True.
because I feel like if this came out over here now, it would be even bigger because like this show reminded me a hell of a lot of Spy Family when I was watching it.
Yeah, it definitely does have like, because it has that very like old school vibe to it.
Yes.
It just takes place during Prohibition, so I mean,
Hmm. Um, I also say that so this was one of those animes that Funimation did the dub on, but I don't think they actually own the rights to. Kind of like Full Metal Alchemist in a sense.
hmm,
Um, because the dub is phenomenal.
yeah, very well done. It was definitely. I feel like when this was dubbed, it was at like Funimation's high point where they still had a lot of the classic actors, but at this point they had a lot more experience than when they had started out. Like they knew what they were doing, and they were just starting to sign on with a lot of like the newer ones, which are kind of like
The newer ones who are like
who are
classics
like
at this point.
staples now. Yeah.
Because like just like to name a few, like right off the bat, you got J. Michael Tatum, Caitlin Glass, just to name a few. Todd Habercorn, who I think this was one of his earlier roles.
Yeah. Ian Mc what the hell? Ian Sinclair. That's his name.
Ian Sinclair, he was yeah, it's funny because he's in everything now, but
Yeah.
this was an
This was
earlier
like
one.
one of his very first roles.
I mean, then you have like staples like Chuck Huber plays a character, um, Brian Massey, Jerry Jewell, like all the
Mhm.
Funimation staples. I'm pretty sure like John Borgmeyer's in here at one point.
Yeah, he's the
Um,
smile guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jason Liebrich is in this. I'm just kind of going down the list. I mean, the
Ironically,
rest.
despite the fact that it's a Funimation dub, no Chris Sabat.
Yeah, I found that interesting. I mean, oh, Chris Patton, one of the classic ADV dubbers who had jumped over, is in this.
Mhm.
I watched Full Metal Panic recently, so that's why Chris Patton's voice pops into my head because he's the main character in that. But
Mhm.
Joe McDonald's in it. Colleen Clickenbeard.
Yeah,
Just
it's
a
a very
whole.
solid cast.
Oh yeah, and it's all mainstay voices that you have definitely heard at one point or another.
Mhm.
It's just funny going down the list of characters because there are so many wacky characters in this show.
So I gotta ask, because you mentioned that you might have to. Did you end up reading a synopsis after you watched it?
I did, and I'm still confused. Um, so I'll say it right off the bat. This show is a show that you have to kind of watch a couple times because it tells a story, but it doesn't tell the story in a linear order by any
It tells
means.
multiple stories, and the
Yes,
I think one of the most confusing parts about it is the fact that there are some characters that are in multiple of the stories, and because it tells chunks of each story in every episode, it can get a little confusing, especially where Isaac and Miria are involved because they are in
true.
all of the stories.
But they are also the best characters in the show
True, this is true.
because they are
Um,
so disconnected from the plot, but they're also in every aspect of it.
mhm. So, how do you want to handle this? Do you want to kind of just jump around and talk about different aspects? Do you want to focus on each individual storyline on its own?
I say we can cover the stories, but I think we should jump around probably a bit, kind of like how the show does, because it just makes
Fair.
sense.
Um,
I found it
yeah,
interesting that the first episode kind of like acts as kind of like an explanation of what goes on, and then it immediately kind of starts jumping around after that.
yeah. It's funny too because the first episode, like if it's just your first time watching, you wouldn't catch on to it at first. But when you go back for your second watch, you realize the first episode, almost everything it shows is the end of the stories.
Yeah, because they talk about the train, the flying the pussyfoot or something
The
like that.
flying pussyfoot, yes.
Yes,
And
what a name.
everybody laughs when they hear that.
That is such a train name, though. Like,
Yeah. Um, so just a basic outline of pretty much covering all of the stories essentially. The story is about Prohibition era and it's immortals and gangsters. It's basically the whole shebang.
so the funniest part about this was we had watched the first episode we were like live streaming some anime earlier, and I'd watched the first episode there, and then
Mhm.
I had like taken like a 2 week break before I jumped into this, and I had completely forgotten about the immortal stuff. So when like the whole like deal with the devil happened, I was like, what the fuck? Like, where did this
Yep.
come from?
Yeah. Which in the books it goes a lot deeper into explaining like what that actually was and like how things get set up. I'm not totally caught up with the books, but I've read like 15 of them. By the way, the anime only covers like the first 4 books and like little tiny snippets of a couple of the later ones, but that's it. That's all the show covers. There's so much more to the story.
So I'm guessing that the train is only like the first like real major story. Like the train kind of goes away after that.
The train is the second and third book.
Okay.
And
Yeah, because
then after that, I believe the train is decommissioned afterwards.
the series basically like it's actually kind of interesting. The series basically is exclusively told on this train, which is interesting to me. It's I kind of like heist train heist kind of stories, so I kind of like
Mhm.
dug this from the start.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I watched it, the train storyline was definitely the part that caught my interest the most.
Mm.
Um, I do. Oh, well, first of all, before we really jump into the story, how's that opening theme?
Very catchy. It's got a lot of bass and a lot of big band, and I like it.
Yeah, it's very jazzy. I like how it does like the character rundown, which I believe is a reference to an old British movie, but I don't remember it because I know my buddy Matt, who showed me this show, actually. He told me what that was from, but I don't remember what it was. I'd have to ask him.
I love like how it starts with that coin flip every time too. Just it's a
Yeah.
nice. Also, you got to give the dubbers credit because like the New York Brooklyn accents that everyone puts on are so spot on.
Oh yeah, it's great. Like very like Newsies kind of like old school Brooklyn accents and shit.
This is a very stylistically accurate show in like every aspect.
Yeah, just like I don't know. There's so much about this show that I just love. Even though it is very confusing, but it's short enough where you can get away with saying, "Okay, I can watch it twice back to back, and now I understand what's going on."
Yeah.
Well, so the three main storylines that are going on is the first storyline, like if we're looking at it chronologically, because the show doesn't, so we will. Chronologically, there's the story around the different mafia and Camorra families in New York, and the story of how a bunch of them became immortals. That's the first storyline. The second storyline is the story on the train where three different factions all kind of collide. And the third story is kind of a continuation of the first story where a character from that story is missing and his sister is trying to find him, and shenanigans happen because of that.
And Isaac and Miri. Wow, my voice just fucked. What's her name again?
Miria.
Miria. Yep. Isaac and Miria are involved in all three of these stories somehow, but also not involved. It is they are enigmas in this show, and I kind of like.
Yes, they are for sure. There's actually a lot of enigmas and a lot of serious nut jobs in this show. That's for sure.
Well, it's like it'll cut from episode to episode, and like you had told me this when we were chatting while I was watching it, and you had mentioned how the best way to tell what's going on is what is Isaac and Miria wearing at the time.
Because their whole shtick is that they are robbers, but they're idiots. So they like to dress up in crazy costumes. Like just for example, I don't know if it was mentioned in the show. I know it was a thing in the books, but they think that they killed a bunch of kids because they stole candy. Yes. They stole a bunch of candy, and they think that a bunch of children starved because they didn't have candy to eat. They also wanted to steal the entirety of a museum and realized that they weren't able to do that. So instead, they stole the entrance. And by that, I mean they stole the door. But that's the kind of shit they get up to. And they dress in crazy costumes for all of it.
I think in this show, we get to see them. They're coal miners. They're dressed up as Native Americans and a nun and a pastor at one point.
Yeah, and they were like a cowboy and a saloon girl at one point. At the end of the series, you see them in like 70s garb, disco garb
in the early 2000s, which makes it even funnier.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I love the way that the series ends with that. By the way, it's fucking great.
Yeah. See, when I saw them in the Native American garb, I was like, what the? I was like, okay, like, what does this have to do with anything? And I think that's kind of the point, that it has nothing to do with anything.
So is anyone listening up to this point who is really confused about what this story is about, watch the show and you'll probably still be just as confused.
Yeah. This is exactly what it's like watching the show, because you're literally gonna go from episode to episode and be like, wait, did I miss an episode? And then you realize, oh no, it's told in such a like non-linear fashion where it literally jumps around, and like you'll see like points that should be near the beginning are like in the middle, and then like points near the beginning are at the end, and it's just all over the place.
Or even just in that first episode when like they're by the train tracks and they're talking about all the bodies that were thrown from the train. You're like, oh, we got a live one over here. And then you see Lad Russo, which if you watch the series, that motherfucker. And he's just missing an arm. And he's got the bone sticking out of his stump and everything. And you're like, okay, how does this happen?
We should also talk about just how fucking violent this fucking show is.
Yeah, it gets pretty rough at point. Not like, it's violent, but it's not like Berserk violent or Hellsing violent. It's definitely not necessarily family friendly.
See,
But
I'd say it's violent in the sense that it's like shockingly violent. Like when you're watching Berserk or Hellsing, at least you know what you're in for. This
you
show, like,
expect it.
yeah, this show you'll be thinking, okay, this is just some weird, goofy crime, like New York crime like drama, and then it's like just guy just explodes blood everywhere, and it's like, oh, okay, we're doing this, I guess.
Yeah.
Like one of the characters literally coats himself completely head to toe in blood, and then just goes on a murder spree, and
He's
it's one
of
of the
my
best
favorite characters.
Oh, the scene with him and Lad Russo fighting on top of the train is literally my favorite part of the show. Just because it's literally just Jerry Jewell and Brian Massey just fucking like chewing the scenery the entire time.
Oh yeah, they absolutely kill it in that scene. I love that whole like monologue that Jerry Jewell goes on in that scene with just like, this whole world is mine. Like, if I were to die, everything would cease to exist. I can make anything happen because I am God in this world. And I don't want to say it's true, but it kind of is. Like,
See,
the
my
dude could
favorite
like do
part.
anything.
My favorite part about that is like Jerry Jewell is like a very like talented voice actor and funny, but like he has like this one voice he does that's like the one that I recognize the most, which is the one he was using in this show. But it's also the same voice he uses for like Kiyosoma in Fruit Baskets. So the whole time I'm like, damn, this is what happened if Kyo snapped and never met Toru.
Yep.
Like this is exactly what would happen.
And I love how how we mentioned earlier with the opening theme song where it gives the rundown of the characters. Notice how it didn't mention, like, you see him like in passing in that, but it doesn't name him specifically because they didn't want to bring attention to him. They wanted that to be a surprise in the show, and I really like how they did that. And I noticed that on my most recent watch through.
That one scene in the train where you see him like in the distance and he looks like this fucking demon running through the train is like, I was like, what the fuck is this show? And then you realize it's just him covered in blood and you're like, oh, okay. And
He's
then,
just like,
then you
he's just like, he literally is just like a circus performer who became an assassin, is just extremely like physics
unhinged.
breakingly unhinged, but physics breakingly like nimble. Like he can just fucking do anything.
Yeah. I like his like one line where he's like, I'm just a train conductor. You killed my friend. Now I'm gonna murder you.
Yeah, his name was Tony.
Yeah.
He was 2 days from retirement. Poor Tony.
Just the way Jerry Jewell delivers that line, I'm just like, Jesus Christ.
I love the scene. I love the scene where he confronts the kid after the train, and he's just like, "Oh, I thought you would have recognized my voice." Blah blah blah. And when the kid realizes it, and the dude just keeps talking, and all of a sudden the kid just and just runs away.
Yeah.
Just loses it.
There's so much shit in the show. Is like the best way I can describe the show is fucking unhinged and off kilter.
Do you know what Baccano means?
No, I do not. What does it mean?
Baccano means ruckus in Italian.
Makes sense. Because
Yeah.
my God, everything about this show is mental.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, let's spread out and talk about some of the individual characters. So Firo is your basic anime protag, even though there is no protag in this show.
Yeah, he was literally kind of like the cover shot character.
Mm-hmm. He is kind of like the poster child of the show.
I mean, he's the guy he's supposed to be like American, but he's very clearly like the Japanese anime protagonist.
Yeah. Well, even though there's only like a couple of Asian characters in this series.
True.
And they're generally not given a ton of focus either. At least in what's covered in the anime. There are more in the books, but
the only one I can think of is like the girl that worked at the club that Isaac and Miriam were like robbing.
Mm-hmm.
When Isaac got shot by the bullet.
Yeah, when they're doing like the initiation into the Kimura family.
Yeah,
like,
I love that
the firing of the ceremonial pistola, and he fires into the roof, and you just hear, "Oh, Isaac's been killed."
Well, I love that scene because they play it early in the show, and they don't bring it up again. It's supposed to, and you think it's just like an off-kilter gag, and you're like, oh, that's dark but funny. And then you find out what actually happened. You're like, oh, that's even funnier because it's once again Isaac and Miria. Once
Yeah,
again.
it's fucking great. It's Isaac and Miri are definitely the heart and soul of the show for sure.
I love their reasoning too. They rob the place and then they just start throwing the money around and they're like, this will make up for all the thefts we did in the past, right? It's like,
Yeah,
sure. That's
it's
exactly how
like
this works.
it's like they came to a point in their thievery where they were just like, you know what? I feel like we should kind of like make up for all the bad shit. So we're still gonna steal, but we're gonna steal from criminals instead now.
And give to the poor. We're the modern day Robin Hood.
Yeah, right. Um, yeah, there's just so much to the show. So they didn't really give them a ton of attention in the series, but I really enjoy the Gandor brothers.
Mm.
Especially the way that they're introduced in the first novel. Um, because I believe in the show. Well, I mean, we see bits and pieces of them, but the first time that they're like really introduced, I believe, is when Dallas goes to them for help,
Mm.
and they kind of just tell him to fuck off. Because I believe in the book, there's actually a scene with them right before he shows up, where they're essentially confronting one of their lieutenants for embezzling their money, and they do like this whole thing where like they're playing poker with him, and uh they're like, oh, let's make it interesting before they actually confront him. They put a revolver on the table and they say, whoever loses, puts this to their head and fires. And they all put their hands down, like all the Gandor brothers, and they've all clearly cheated. Like they
Yeah.
like they have like a six of a kind in some cases, like random shit like that. Like it's very obviously they're cheating. Just to like kind of like um draw him out, and they're like, we know you've been stealing money from us, blah blah blah, like you lost, do the gun thing. And they do this whole like run through where it was a blank in the gun, but he turned it on them, and they basically were like, oh, you chose the worst choice. Is like, if you had put the gun to your head and fired, we would have just let you go and cut ties. If you had begged and pleaded for your life, we would have kicked your ass and then we would have let you go. But now you're gonna die because you tried to kill us. Like, is this? It's I can't really do it justice by explaining it, but it's just such a badass scene when you read it for the first time when the Gandors are introduced. It's just so cool.
Oh yeah.
And Luck is just a cool character.
Mm. I was gonna say too, like another scene we should really talk about is the scene where like that explains the whole immortality thing.
On the ship.
The part where they drink the elixir and become
Mhm.
immortal for the first time.
Yeah. So the way that the liquor of immortality gets there is
Mm.
it jumps around before it actually gets to their table and is drank, because there's this character called Zillard Quates,
Mm.
who was one of the original immortals where all of this starts, from 200 years previous, and he had been trying to perfect the liquor, and finally succeeded, only for a couple of schmucks to accidentally burn down the warehouse that it was being made in. So they were only able to save 2 bottles of it, and basically it goes from getting stolen by um, Dallas's group to being left at the Gandors to being stolen again by Isaac and Miria, and then being brought to where it would eventually be drunk.
Yeah. I just love the scene where like he drinks it and he's like, huh, does it even work? And the eerie voice in the back's like, oh, what, you don't trust me? And then he's like, how about this? And he just fucking cuts his head off.
Yep.
And then you're just like, oh shit. And then it just like kind of like it shows you how the immortality, they just kind of like it just kind of like sticks itself back together, and he gets back up, like the blood flows back in and everything, and he's like, you believe me now? And it's like, wow, like that's a dark
Yeah.
scene. But then
Yeah, for
immediately
sure.
everybody's like, oh, it works, and they just start drinking it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because I don't think I've ever really seen this kind of immortality before this series. 'Cause there's been many different variations of immortality through fiction, and this is definitely the most interesting, I think.
Well, it's like it's weird because it's like they're immortal, and but they can still be killed, but by other only by other immortals.
which is the first time you see that happen, that's disturbing.
Yeah, like the because you see the fucking basically they have this ability where if they can like touch them on like the forehead with their hand and then like just like think of devouring them and then it just literally like they get sucked into their hand and it's like bone and all. It's fucking it's like the most fucked up scene in the anime.
Yeah, it's incredibly graphic for what it is. Yeah, it's definitely pretty dark, but like the whole concept of it, and then just like then like yeah, you're killing them, but you're also absorbing them into yourself, so you gain all of their knowledge, all of their experience, all of their skills, like all of their memories, everything that they are becomes a part of you.
Well, that was like to me like the biggest like shock was like Zillard's eventual demise. I wasn't expecting him to get fucking devoured by Firo of all people at the end of the series.
Mm-hmm. Which is a big reason why, like, I feel like the series kind of tries to paint him as the main character because it had been established that Zillard had eaten like what 18 other immortals, so he has a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills that he's absorbed throughout the years. So Firo just gets that like day one, right after he becomes immortal.
It's interesting to me though how Firo's like intended to be the main character, but when you actually break it down, he really doesn't appear that often compared to some of the other characters.
Yeah, he's not there a lot.
Like most of the train stuff, he's only kind of basic, barely there.
He's not even in the train.
Yeah, like
he's
he gets
waiting
like
at the train station for the train to show up because he knows people who are coming there on the train.
yeah, like he's at the beginning of the train arc and then at the end, and it's like, but
Yeah,
because
because
it's in,
they're waiting for Isaac, Miria, and Claire.
yes,
Because apparently everybody back in New York is buddies with Claire Stanfield and grew up with him.
yeah. Well, you know, there's always that one buddy from New York
Mm-hmm.
that everyone knows.
Um,
Um, Another super fucked up scene was the kid. I forget the kid's name.
uh, the little kid,
Yeah, the
Chesla.
oh yeah, Ches. His whole backstory was super fucked, where like he was just
Oh
like
yeah,
fucking tortured, like just on end until he fucking finally had enough and killed his he absorbed his
his quote
torturer.
unquote guardian.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty fucked up for
I
sure.
love the scene too where like he's being confronted by Jerry Jules' character. I forget the name. Sorry.
Claire.
Yeah, Claire. And he's like, do your worst. I've been tortured by everything. Nothing frightens me. And Claire's just like, you want to bet? And just
Yeah,
immediately just goes super extra.
yeah, he's like, you ever heard of any Chinese styles of execution or Japanese torture? When they rip your muscles apart and carve intricate things into your bones. It's like, Jesus Christ, dude. He may be immortal, but he's still fucking 8 years old.
I love the fact too that he then proceeds to put him under the fucking train and just let him get dragged like the entire time.
Yeah, that was a pretty fucked up scene. And like, despite the fact that Claire does all that stuff, you just still can't help but like him. Like, I don't know what it is. He just has that magnetism about him.
Well, Claire is just so fucking unhinged that like he's not even like really. He goes from being a villain to just being kind of like a comedy character because he's so insane.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Well, it's like when he's fighting against Lad Russo on the top of the train. You're literally got these two absolute piece of shits like fighting, but you just kind of like both of them because they're so ridiculous.
Yeah, they're just so over the top crazy that you can't help but you would never want to be in the same room as one of them.
Yeah.
I'd probably be a little bit more open to being in the room with Claire than Lad, but
yeah.
Maybe we should talk about Lad a little bit. So because he was the leader of one of the factions on the train. The white suits of the Russo family. And one of the big, because he's, obviously we see him from episode 1, but the first episode that we really get like a decent amount of focus on him, I believe, is like episode 4, when you kind of get that little bit with him presenting his plan to his uncle, the leader of the Russo family.
Hmm.
and kind of telling him his whole idea about the train that he wants to do and everything. And like right away, like these two henchmen or these two like members of the mafia are talking to the boss, and Lad just kind of walks in and just casually kills both of them
Yes.
just for kicks.
He literally gets off on murdering people. That's like his entire shtick.
But he only likes to kill people who can't even imagine the thought of themselves dying. And it doesn't matter whether they're strong or weak um or good or bad. It just if death is the furthest thing from your mind, watch out for him because he will come for you.
Yeah, and he'll do it with a smile on his face,
Yeah,
and
he'll
he'll tell you
fucking
everything he's going to do.
he'll fucking oh man. I'm pretty sure he drops the only F bomb in the show.
Yeah, that caught me off guard. I was like, oh,
Yeah, right.
it,
And I love
it
that scene too because he's just being a fucking goofball, like while he's
it
dancing on this fucking corpse's head.
legitimately anytime like an anime that like is generally, I mean, it's swearing in anime is very common, but like when you don't see a lot of f bombs all the time. So like generally, whenever you get to an anime where they just straight up drop an f bomb, it usually catches you off guard. 'Cause you're like, whoa, okay. It's like in
Yeah.
Persona. It's like in Persona 4. Whenever like a fucking f bomb gets dropped during dialogue, I'm always like, damn. All right.
Mhm. Oh. So yeah, and then I believe right after that scene, we get a flash forward to him on the train, where he walks into a room with a couple of the black suits and proceeds to beat the living shit out, like literally beat one of them to death with his bare hands, screaming about boxers of the era, like,
Yeah.
and just losing his shit, laughing. Like I don't know, it just there's something about watching Lad on the screen that just gets me jazzed.
Well, it's the fact that it's fucking Brian Massey too, and he's doing his fucking oolong voice the entire time.
Yeah, it's pretty. Actually, I think this predates him playing Oolong.
Oh yeah, I forgot he wasn't the original oolong. That's true.
Um, yeah, it's just I don't know. It's just such a fun show to watch. All the characters are so fucking vibrant and alive, even though they're so fucking unrealistic. Like,
We should
um,
probably talk about Jacuzzi because he's pretty important.
yeah, I was gonna bring him up next. Jacuzzi and Nice and Nick and Donnie is like that little group.
They are such goofballs. Like they're like the incompetent group that just kind of walks into all their success
Hmm.
by accident.
Yeah. And I love like their whole story too. All the stuff that led up to them being on the train, and then obviously the story of the train. Because Jacuzzi he's the leader of their little like ragtag band of like outcasts,
Mm.
and they are bootleggers. They make and sell booze. And so this kid is like a total crybaby. Like he will cry
Yeah,
at the drop of a hat. He's super fucking gullible because the second he hears a story of the rail tracer, he fully believes it, full tilt. Like everyone's gonna die if I don't go talk to the conductor who told this story. Like, which is ironic because the conductor who told the story becomes the rail tracer.
yeah,
Um, and he's also got a sword tattoo on his face, and he like looks like a fucking 14-year-old.
yeah. And his voice is the best because he's like, it's exactly what you'd expect from like an awkward like 14-year-old.
Mhm. And then you got his girlfriend who's completely covered in old burn scars and is missing an eye.
She's kind of badass though.
Yeah, she's great. I love Niece. Um,
Honestly, that whole group is fun. Like anytime they're on screen, they're pretty awesome.
yeah, for sure. They're a very endearing group of characters, and they're all like very. I mean, yeah, like while they are killing and they are, you know, technically doing crime by bootlegging and everything, but they're very moral. I feel like they are like the moral center of that story.
Mm,
Um, Like
yeah,
they go out of their way to go up against the black suits, the white suits, and hold their own,
yeah.
which is pretty impressive. All
And the
things considered.
and then Isaac and Amiria just kind of show up and they fuck shit up and then disappear. It's great.
Yeah. I will say this show is very quotable for sure.
It is. I love the scene too in the train where it's Isaac and Miria, and like Miria's in that like really tight red dress, and like someone like trips and falls and grabs the front of her dress and just fucking
Yeah, it was
pulls it
jacuzzi.
open.
Yeah.
Yeah, jacuzzi and just gets a full on eyeful, and like they
Yep.
completely after that's done with, she just completely doesn't even acknowledge it. She's like, oh well,
Yeah,
it
because
happens.
she's such a ditch that she didn't even occur to her that that was like a thing.
Yeah, it's just like what? Like I remember seeing that, I was like, holy shit,
Hmm.
what a show.
So yeah, they're pretty heavily involved throughout the whole train story and the OVA story as well.
Hmm.
Um, like Jacuzzi actually ends up ultimately going up against the leader of the Black Suits, which um I'm guessing you didn't have a ton of context for the Black Suits whole deal. Um,
Yeah, not a ton. I'm assuming that's
so
explained more in the books.
yes. So if you recall, there were scattered scenes throughout the show of one of the original immortals from the boat who was in prison, and like
Mm,
a couple people visited him throughout. He was the guy played by Eric Vale with the French
right,
accent. Um, so basically, a group of people kind of just congregated around him and kind of created a cult with him as like their god and leader. Specifically because they wanted to learn the secret of his immortality, and they were essentially hijacking the train because there was a senator's wife and daughter on the
right.
train who they were going to threaten they were going to threaten their lives to try and get their leader Huey out of jail, and that was their whole deal. And among them was Huey's daughter, who becomes very important later on.
Hmm.
I love her fight with Lad too on the rooftop. That was great. There was like three or four different rooftop fights.
Yeah, there honestly was. Who's the character that's literally the guy behind the stack of papers who you never see his face?
Oh, that's the leader of the president of the Daily Days, the
Okay.
information broker and newspaper outlet.
I just love any scene with him because it's literally just a giant stack of papers and you just hear his disembodied voice behind it.
Yeah, I love that one scene where fucking the character who literally goes by Sugar Cube because he's always eating sugar cubes. He's just like, "Hey, do you want one?" And he's like, "Oh, don't mind if I do." And like the other two characters are watching him go by the behind the stack of papers, like in shock because apparently they've never seen his face either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like goofy shit like that is always fun.
Yeah, it was pretty great. Um, but yeah, that's the whole black suits deal. So we had the black suits, the white suits, and then Jacuzzi's gang, and there was the main three factions of the train story. Um, yeah, it's just I don't know. There's so much to the story, and it's hard to quantify it in a way that makes sense because it happens so disjointedly. Like if I was talking about the books, I'd probably be able to lay it out in a straight way, but
Hmm.
because the books actually tell it chronologically for the
Well, I
most part.
do. I like how every section starts with like the year and like date.
Mhm.
Because like literally the ending of the series, not counting the OVAs, like the specials, it literally just cuts to like it's like 2000 like two, I
2001, I
think,
think.
or 2001. And it literally it's just like it's Isaac and Miria in like New York City, like modern day, like modern cars and everything. They're just in the 70s disco gear. And the best
Mhm.
part is their whole line. They're like, wait a minute. Have you noticed how we never seem to age?
This is like 70 years after all the
Yeah.
events that the story takes place,
Like
and they're like,
they're
it's this big revelation to them, like, oh my god, that's right, we haven't. Like,
they're completely just oblivious to the fact that they're immortal. Like,
yeah, I love that whole bit that they just don't know that they're immortal the whole time, and like,
yeah,
there's a plot point because Ches is so like, he's so like scarred by all like the torture and stuff that he went through that because that's actually a rule, when you become immortal is you can't give a false name to another immortal. It's like an impulse thing. You can't help it. You have to tell them your true name. So when Ches is introducing himself on the train, he says his real name and he's like, "Oh shit, that means there's an immortal here." And he's like freaking out about it because he doesn't know who it is. and he figures out that it's Isaac and Miria, but they still don't know that they're immortal,
Yeah.
or even that immortality is even a thing. They're completely oblivious to it.
Because there's that scene where they're all like upset because they think he's dying because like he basically bled out under the train, and he's freaking out because he's like this is where I die, but then like they don't do anything because they have no idea, and he's like what?
Yeah, it's really bizarre, but it's very fun, very fun.
That scene where his blood is like slowly coming back to him from like the miles behind them on the ground.
Yeah,
And it freaks out all the other the people fighting on the top because they're like, "What the fuck? What is this?" Like, I don't get
yeah,
it.
like the leader of the Black Suits is like blasting it with a flamethrower because he's like, "What the hell?"
Oh, his fucking death was the most like hilarious death in the series because he's got a flamethrower and he just
For
like
sure.
falls off the train and lands right on the tank and then just boom, like just dead.
Yep. I love that too because like he only lost because Isaac and Miria were hanging onto the train by a rope that Donnie, like the big dude from Jacuzzi's group, was trying to pull them up on, and he just fucking clotheslined the black suit guy.
Yeah, and broke his tank. And the funniest part is they completely like just they're once again just completely unrelated to what's going on. They just happen to be there,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah,
great.
it's fantastic. So we haven't talked very much about there's a few different people we haven't really touched on. We got Dallas and his group, which he's really the only important person in that group, but he's the character played by Ian Sinclair, which it took me a little bit to actually realize that was him until I like really became more aware of Ian Sinclair as an actor.
Ian Sinclair's range is surprisingly huge. It's interesting because you're most of the time you know him just for his over the top like theatrics, like Brooke or Whis or the narrator from Kaguya-sama. Like those are
Yeah.
probably his three most well known roles these days, and he's so over the top when he plays these characters. But then
Yeah.
like you get like his more reserved roles, like this character or he's one of the Somas in Fruit Baskets, like the last one that appears that's like very subdued.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he in this show he is like the biggest piece of shit, and that's saying something. Like
Yeah.
considering what we've talked about up to this point, he's like the biggest piece of shit in the show. He's just
Well,
total
this
scumbag.
show is literally a giant entire ensemble cast of pieces of shit when you really think about it.
Yeah, even the good characters are technically like kind of pieces of shit.
Yeah, I mean it's like Isaac and Viria are like the best characters, but they are also kind of pieces of shit just for the shit they've done in the past.
Yeah,
Granted, they're
like
more just kind of like by proxy.
lovable idiots.
Yeah.
But yeah, like so Dallas he was like the heir to this really rich family's fortune, but actually I think he was the younger son, but his father and his older brother were both killed by a character who shows up later. And uh Isaac and Miria stole their entire family fortune because Eve was upset about it causing dissension in their family. So he was all like fucking pissy about that because it never says it in the show, but in the book it actually says that he was actually planning on killing his father and brother for that inheritance. And they pretty much just like beat up and rob anyone who happens to fucking cross their path on the street.
Yeah.
Including the old man who had distilled the liquor of immortality in the first place. Which,
yep.
Yeah, and then they proceed to get their asses kicked a lot.
There is a lot of ass kicking in this show, like just in general.
Oh yeah, it's a very action-packed show for sure. But like, even though a lot of it is very over the top and like definitely taking it to an extreme, like a lot of it is pretty rooted in reality. You know, putting aside the immortal stuff.
Yeah. If the mortal stuff wasn't there, this would be actually a pretty realistic show.
Yeah, especially with the way that like in the beginning, like one of the very first scenes where like Firo is getting jumped by the homeless guy, and like he goes to like grab the knife, and like the guy pulls back the knife like in surprise, and his fingers just come right off.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was the first scene where you realize, oh, this show is not very kind to hands and fingers,
No,
because
not at all.
a lot of people lose fingers in this show.
Yeah, they get him back a
Um,
lot of the time, but they also lose him a lot.
yeah. But then we also have Ennis, who is a homunculus created by Zillard. Um, which I think it's like a failed homunculus technically, because I mean, this isn't something you would learn from the anime itself, but the devil that was summoned on the ship, he's not actually a devil. He's a homunculus. He's a perfected real homunculus, where like the actual concept of one where like a true homunculus is like a conduit of information, essentially,
Mhm.
like just a wellspring of knowledge that no human has any business knowing, which is why he knows how to make the immortality liquor in the first place, and can
Yeah.
like speak to people telepathically and stuff like that, take different forms, so on.
Mm.
um and there's a bunch of like minor characters, like Mize is kind of an important, he's a very important character actually, because he's the one who summons the devil in the first place, but he's also very minor in the actual story.
Yeah.
um he's kind of more of a conduit to the events that happen throughout. And then you got the smiley guy,
Mm.
uh and he's really fun. He doesn't have a whole lot of screen time, but he's a very fun character. You do get more of him in the books. He gets a storyline. He gets a whole book to himself, and it takes place in the 2000s,
Oh, really?
which is pretty cool. Yeah, that's the one thing about the books, is even though it's mostly chronological, occasionally it will just jump forward into the early 2000s and then jump back, like
Hmm.
in a later book. Like I believe the first four books take place in like the late 20s, early 30s, and then the fifth book jumps forward to 2001, and then the sixth book goes back to the early 30s.
Hmm.
Um, which is kind of cool, because you kind of get to see like, where some of the characters end up decades in the future and stuff like that, which is, it's interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and it does add like an extra level of like mystery to it, because there's a lot of things that kind of happen behind the scenes in those intervening years that you don't know about until later.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think if there are any other major characters we haven't touched on yet. Oh, we didn't talk about Lad's girlfriend.
Oh, yeah, she's there.
Yeah, she's the reason he got thrown off the train in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, their relationship is weird.
Most of the relationships in the show are kind of weird. Like it's weird that the healthiest relationship seems to be Isaac and Miria.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I give Firo and Ennis a pass. They do ultimately end up getting married. It takes about 60 years, but it does happen.
Mm.
Um, there's actually a two book, two-part story that is like their honeymoon. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of like the major. I think we've covered pretty much most of the major stuff, except for like the OVA stuff with Graham Spector, who was an
Dom-
interesting last minute addition.
Dominoes. Just
Yeah, the
dominoes.
Dominoes part.
It's like oh, it's a game for children who don't know how to actually play dominoes, and of course,
Yeah,
it's Isaac and Miriam putting it together,
yep. But like everyone's super invested in it, which is really funny.
and then Firo accidentally knocks it over,
Mhm.
and they're like, "No!"
They're all excited about it and shit. Um, so the whole Graham Spector thing. So this is like after the train. Um, so Graham Spector is a character in New York who like idolizes Lad Russo. Like they met a few years beforehand,
Mhm.
and they're like best friends pretty much. And he's crazy, but in a different way. He likes to break things. That's kind of his whole thing.
Yeah.
And he's just like super eccentric, like outrageously, where I can't even begin to describe. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of nut jobs in this show, and it makes the show very entertaining.
Oh yeah.
Even when you have no idea what's going on, it's extremely entertaining the whole way through. And for some reason, he just has like super strength for no reason.
Well, it happens.
It's like the one case in this series where it's just like that makes no sense. Like he's way too strong. Like he just like starts destroying the whole fucking like cement floor.
I love the fact that he's fucking. It's Chris Patton. It's just
Yeah,
Chris Patton being Chris Patton.
yeah, it's fantastic. And of course he ends up fighting Claire because of course Lad's little like protege has to fight the guy who beat him.
Yeah.
Which was really fun. I love that whole. I love the fight between Chane and Lad as well on top of the train because
Yeah.
I just loved Lad's reactions to everything that was happening. Like every time she would like deflect a bullet with her knife or something, he just like, did that just happen?
He's like, whoa.
He's like,
I'm
this
gonna
is
enjoy.
awesome.
I'm gonna enjoy killing you.
Yeah, it's just fucking fantastic.
And then when he's fighting Claire, he's like, hey, I have first dibs on her. I get to kill her first.
For real. It's just the way that the characters interact throughout this show is just so fun. It's like I can't gush enough about this show. It's one of those things you kind of have to experience, which is really a shame because of how
really
unavailable
difficult.
it is.
Yep.
I mean, you can get the bootleg. I paid like, I don't know, maybe $20 for the bootleg that I sent you. So like you can get it, but it's not gonna be the best quality, but it's still worth it.
The picture was fine. Like for what it was just sometimes the disc didn't want to read.
Yeah. I will say though, if anyone is on the either the SuperPod or the GNC Discords, I am fully open and willing to doing watch parties as I have it on my hard drive and can anytime do a watch party of that. So if anyone's interested, let me know because I would love for more people to experience this show because it is a time for sure.
I wonder who owns the rights to it, honestly, because I feel like that's the reason why it's fucking in this weird limbo. I'm actually kind of curious.
I have no idea, honestly. I feel like it's an Aniplex show, but I don't
I want to say Aniplex because Aniplex seems to always be the one that holds these shows in fucking purgatory.
Yeah.
Yep, Aniplex of America, of course.
Yeah. It's always fucking Aniplex.
Well, they own all these shows and they have to hold them in purgatory forever.
Yeah, which is a real shame because a lot of them are so fun to watch. Even if it's not like a super engaging story, it's just super fucking fun. Like, I've never watched Baccano and not had a great time.
See, I feel like this is one of those shows that if it came out now, Netflix would have picked it up.
Yeah. And I would love a continuation because there is so much more to the story. Like, there's a whole storyline in the books where Huey, the French guy, gets sent to Alcatraz. Lad Russo also gets sent to Alcatraz, which it was a whole thing in the series where he wanted to kill Huey just because of Chane. And Firo also gets sent to Alcatraz. They're all in Alcatraz at the same time.
Yeah.
And craziness ensues. There's some hive mind stuff that gets brought in later. There's plenty of characters that weren't introduced in the show that are introduced later on. There's a character named Christopher who is just very fun. And I really wish he had been a part of the anime. I don't know. It's just there's so much potential and there's so many stories that it really is upsetting that we'll probably never get that in anime form.
The sad part is that you can't even say it was because it didn't do well here because it did. It was that it bombed in Japan, and unfortunately, that's where it matters.
Yeah, for sure. And this one works so well as a live action. I think because like the only like real supernatural aspect of it is the immortality itself.
That and the devouring people through the hands. That would be probably the only thing that would be hard to transfer to live action, but
true. I'm sure they could figure it out though. I mean, if all of your budget for special effects is going into CGI blood and the act of eating people, which doesn't happen that often anyway,
There's only
I
the
think,
one time it's seen up close, and it's the honestly the most disturbing point in the series.
oh,
But
easily. Um, but yeah, there's so much potential there. Like there's over 20 books. And for anyone who's interested and doesn't want to go out of the way to try and get the anime, um the novels are available. They have been translated and brought over here, and they are now getting official audiobooks on Audible. I believe the first two are out. The third one will be coming soon. So look forward to those. Um, I'm certainly excited about it. And they actually got a dude with a pretty thick Brooklyn accent to read it. So that's pretty cool.
nice.
He does a good job too, for sure.
Hmm. Um, I think that just about does it.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered up most of the bases. I feel like I'm gonna go back later and be like, fuck, I forgot this character. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where this is an ensemble series. There's a lot of characters, and they pop in and out consistently throughout.
Yes.
Like I know we didn't talk about a bunch of the Daily Days guys. We didn't even touch on Dallas's sister, but I mean, that's kind of a minor point anyway.
Yeah. It's just
Um,
kind of one of those things where the show, a discussion of the show sounds disjointed because the show itself is incredibly disjointed.
yeah, for sure. And while it is confusing and like while you're watching it, you kind of scratch your head like, why do they do it this way? Um, when you really think about it, the series is only 16 episodes, and there's 4 different storylines that happen throughout.
Mm,
So if you were to tell it chronologically, no, not only would a lot of like the mystique and tension be taken out because each of these arcs would only be about 3 episodes long,
mm.
and so in that way, I can kind of see why they did it this way. Honestly, I think they should have just foregone the series in general and just done movies. Like one movie per storyline would have been perfect.
Yeah, that probably would have made more sense, but movies weren't as common back in the day. Like this came out
True.
'07, I want to say.
Oh, I think it was 08. But yeah, this
I
was
think it must
literally a
have.
point.
I think I think it came out in Japan in '07. We got the dub in '08. I think
Okay.
that's how it
Um,
was.
but yeah, it was definitely at a point in time where with the exception of like Studio Ghibli movies, like big theatrical release anime movies weren't super like super consistent at a time.
Nah, there'd be like a few
Uh,
here and there, but for the most part, it was very far in between.
yeah, they were still kind of doing more like the mini movies that they would do at like film festivals and stuff in Japan.
Mm.
You know, they like like the early Dragon Ball movie kind of style, and some other series that did the same thing, but
Yeah, but yeah. So I think that'll wrap up this discussion of Baccano. It was,
uh,
I will say, it was really good getting to finally experience it.
out of curiosity, what did you give it on?
I think I
Uh,
gave it, I think I gave it an 8 out of 10,
that's
and
fair.
an 80% on any list.
That's fair. Yeah, I definitely, as much as I love the story, I definitely, because of the confusing nature of the structure itself, for that alone, you can't exactly give it top marks. But
No,
I
like
mean,
I don't
the
know if it would.
story is engaging. The characters are so vibrant and alive. It's so
Hmm.
entertaining. There's so many good interactions between the characters. Even if you're confused watching it, you will have a great time. I guarantee it.
Yeah, like I don't know if it would make my top 25 list, but it's definitely a show that I'd consider watching again at some point.
Mhm. And I definitely highly recommend anyone check out the books because
Hmm.
it's a very fun story, and it was where I left off. They were definitely building up to something
Hmm.
big, so
Yeah,
definitely worth it.
nice. But with that, everybody, once again, thank you for joining us on Geek Addicts. You can find Geek Addicts on all your major podcasting platforms, particularly Apple Podcast and Spotify. And be sure to check us out over on the Superpod Network. That is superpodnetwork.com. You see the link down below. Um, super awesome group of podcasters. We have a ton of different shows on the network, a bunch of videos, blogs, all sorts of that stuff. And you can check out a whole bunch of other creators, including Superpod Saga, Super Ghost Radio, Retro Rehab, Tommy's Video Game Ride Along, A Novel Console, Bar Silence, Fine Time, The Elder Trolls Gaming Podcast, Remember 64, Gaming Together, Friday Night Gamecast, and then, of course, the 3GNC shows, Gaming and Collecting, the 3DO Experience, and Geek Addicts. And with that, everybody, we will see you all later.
Have a good one.